Hello again. I hope everybody enjoyed your lunch. And I'm going to say, I don't know how many of you have ever been to Disneyland? Okay. How many of you went to Disneyland when they had tickets, like, you know, the e-ticket ride? Okay, so put your seatbelts on. We've had an exciting program, highly knowledgeable, challenging, can be emotional. And for this afternoon, we have an e-ticket ride for you. So take your tickets out. And I'm going to start off with our first speaker. I'm honored to present the next speaker of the day. She has spoken at previous conferences and by popular demand will present again today. She's worked with children and families since 1976. She's been conducting family mediations for 30 years. She has a clinical practice where she works with families, couples, and individuals. She has her JD degree. She also does forensic work. She has a BS in nursing and her master's degree in marriage, family, and child counseling. She has a certificate in public interest law focusing on disability rights. She serves as an expert consultant in legal cases all over the country. She is an amazing person to know. I'm honored to introduce Valerie Houghton.
Good afternoon. Oh, come on. Let's take a breath. This is the killer time of the day. It's the first thing after lunch. Thank you, Cindy. Okay, so I want to make sure everybody's breathing and alert because we're going to cover some material really quickly today because we're short on time. But the topic I'm going to be discussing is the intergenerational trajectory of family alienation. Who knows what trajectory is? I want a woman. Yes. 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 Yeah. Takes off, flies. We were talking about it actually at lunch, just about how the Harlem Shuffle, took off in 3 weeks and became viral. It's the same kind of thing. And it just keeps burning like a heart attack. Because I have a little bit of OCD, not very much, but just a little tiny bit, about probably 2.7%. It really bothers me that the February 23rd, 2013 date is wrong, and it's smushing into the others, but I just wanted to just say that and get my feelings out there for you. Okay, so I'm going to try to get through this. I haven't used this setup before, but I've been instructed. How many of you ever say, when somebody asks you, how are you, you just say fine? Can you see the writing in the background? Angry, broken, scared, isolated, alone, about to have a breakdown, sad, betrayed, stupid, used. But I say I'm fine. The problem with this whole thing with alienation is that people say, well, how long has this been going on? And my response to that is usually, did anybody read the Old Testament? I mean, come on, people. I actually did not read the Old Testament. I did read the Thesaurus twice. But, yeah, it's just that clear. The other thing is that how many people think that alienation has anything to do with bullying? Show of hands? Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. My view about it is that I deal with a lot of bullying situations. I work with a lot of children and really help them develop the language about how to be able to stand up for themselves appropriately. In fact, I seem to spend a lot of my time teaching adults about that too. And the way that I frame it for them is, over in that corner are your feelings, and over in this corner are your thoughts. And all along that wall is a spectrum of behavior. And no matter how you feel and no matter what you think, it doesn't give you a hall pass to behave poorly. So that spectrum is divided into appropriate and inappropriate behavior. Because it's really easy for children to say, well, I had to hit Tommy because I was mad. And then we go through this, no, actually, you had some angry feelings, and we're going to start developing your vocabulary, and let's talk about some of the things you were thinking. Well, you know, Tommy isn't very nice, and he didn't invite me to his birthday party, and plus he told me that I throw like a girl, et cetera, et cetera. But you still have to make appropriate decisions about how you handle your behavior. So, if you think about the Old Testament, and if you think about all of the anti-bullying stuff that finally is in the newspaper, a lot of that has implications for how it is that you think about family alienation. Now, as a nurse, I was an ICU nurse for a number of years until I realized that we didn't have any services for families, and that made me kind of crazy, so then I had to go back to school. And then I became a hospice nurse. And my job was the assistant patient care coordinator. I went out and visited everybody. And so I did the initial meeting. So when the family called, patient called, I would go out and I would meet with them and say, okay, so what needs do you have? How can we arrange for you to be as comfortable and as in charge as possible? So everything that they possibly needed, I was in charge of finding them. And then if we didn't have a nurse available, we had a staff of 16 nurses. All of us were volunteer, except me. Then I kept them. Because you can't really say to a hospice patient, you know, we're really busy right now, could you just hold on? Right? So I knew everybody, I knew all the families, and I spent a lot of time with them. A lot of that time was in the middle of the night, which was fine because I was in my 20s and I didn't have children, and it was fine. It was very meaningful work, but it also, I was 27, and it really changed my outlook on life. I got a really good opportunity to listen to a lot of people talk about their regrets and to also talk about their triumphs. And it was very meaningful to me about how many of those families came running together at the 11th hour and how many of them didn't. So when I see this and it's, how are you? I'm fine. Sometimes I think about what would happen if somebody walks towards us and asks us, how are you? And we say, you know, I'm kind of angry. I'm a little broken, scared, isolated, feeling like I might have a nervous breakdown. Can you imagine the look on their face? I hope you have someone you can talk to about that. I'm sure that's why therapists were invented. I wanted to tell you a story about my very first alienation case that was identified as an alienation case. And my job was, I was brought in to evaluate whether or not this was a case of estrangement or alienation. Let's not get into the terms, but that's what it was, based on our terms of the current time. And that's what my job was. And I went and I came up with the idea that, okay, well, yeah, this is a mess. And yes, is this one parent doing a bunch of behavior that is really alienating the children away from the father? Yes. Is the father doing things that are contributing to his own mess in life? Yes. Well, what do we call that? And I didn't have to get into I didn't have to answer the big question, but it sure did get me interested in alienation cases. So between the two of those, I started down that trail. A few months ago, and that was 25 years ago, a few months ago, I got a phone call from a woman, and she said, you used to be our, whatever it was, when I was young. And I said, okay. And I said, what's your name? So she told me, and I said, oh, yeah. She goes, do you remember me? And I said, yes. And she goes, are you sure you remember me? I said, yes. You're the oldest of 3 sisters. After you graduated from high school, you got involved with that biker guy, but you dumped him. That was really good. And last I heard, you were working at a grocery store. You do remember me. It was pretty amazing. I said, I remember everybody. It's a funny thing. It's like the date on that thing. I remember. But what she said was, I wanted to call you and see if you were available to do family therapy with our family. Because I'm going through alienation now myself. And I have a 9-year-old daughter who's being alienated against me. So here, all this time has passed, and so it goes. It's like a heart attack. It just keeps on rolling until it's stopped. It just keeps going. The other thing, it's amazing to me because it's pretty common that these children show up later. In fact, I have this really cute couple where the father, he called me up, same thing. Do you remember me? Yes, I remember you. Are you sure you remember me? Yes, I'm sure. I mean, jeez. Yes, you graduated from UC Santa Cruz with this degree. You got your first job in San Diego. You're dating somebody named something or other, and I think you just got your first job. And you had a cat named Binky or something. And he said, oh, you do remember me. But the reality is that, so he said, you know, you remember my family, right? And I said, yes, of course I remember your family. And he said, and he laughed, and he said, well, then you know that we have communication problems. I said, mm-hmm. And he said, so I'm really serious about this woman, and I wanted to come in. I thought maybe we probably need some communication skills. I said, cool, come on over. So we worked on communication skills. And it's really been cute because the two of them sit next to each other, and they're very adorable. And they just got married, and now they have a new little adorable little boy who has also those same blue eyes. So I look at them, and I feel like I'm looking at three little owls. It's just adorable. But it is brutal to watch this guy struggling with experiencing himself as a husband, experiencing himself as a son, experiencing himself as a father, all at the same time. Because his father is now going through his 4th divorce, and came to him and asked him if he would help him with his custody fight for his current young children, at the very same time when he was getting married and celebrating the birth of his son. So speaking of colliding worlds, and I always tell people, if you think that you're going to throw all that emotional stuff into the front hall closet, you know, where all the pieces of the vacuum cleaner go that you never really know what they do, if you want to see that door start bulging, get married or get into a committed relationship. And if you really want to blow the door off the building, have a child. And I think that should be on the baby car seats that they make you have in the car before you take the babies home, because it's that significant. I don't think it's an accident that 85% of divorces involve children under the age of 5. So, but anyway, so these little beautiful blue-eyed owl people are going through the sequence of events that is following what originally happened. And his father, Mr. Divorce number 4, I'm sorry, Dr. Divorce number 4, he was also alienated from his father for a long time. So it's his family tradition, and it also is on both sides of that family. So these young people, of course, are educated, they're enthusiastic, and motivated. And it's really amazing watching people get skills before they, you know, find themselves getting dragged into the abyss for reasons they do not understand. So, family cystogenogram. How many people have heard of the word genogram? Okay, it's not hard. Do you like my little cartoon down at the bottom? Can you see that? It's Cruella and her crew. There's a Cruella is on the front on the left, and I can't remember the guy's name on the right. But they're supposed to be the extended family that you don't want to have. Why people aren't more concerned about looking at the whole family before they get together with somebody is really beyond me. So the structure of the family can tell you a lot. And it's one of the things we do as family therapists is we will sit down and draw out essentially a map. So I'm going to ask you in a couple minutes to sit down and draw out a map, so get ready. Nuclear is the family where you grew up where you had parents and supposedly lived in one house, and perhaps you had siblings, and that's your own little nuclear family lily pad. The extended family is the family like your grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. Those are your extended family. And when you're trying to figure out, well, what in the world is going on in our family, and what are the dynamics, try to figure out, okay, what are the jungle drums saying? You start looking at the quality of the relationships between people and subgroups. How many people know that families sometimes have teams? Yes, teams. Well, we, in therapy land, we call those subgroups, not teams. It sounds nicer, but if you've had much experience on being on the receiving end of a jihad team, it's brutal. And then what is the family narrative? So if I ask you to tell me about who your family is, where do you come from? What kinds of things come to your mind? How would you describe your family? Give me some words. Cuba. Cuba, like the country? Yes. Okay. Workaholic. What else? Divorce. Some alcoholic. Okay. Okay. And sometimes you'll hear people get to the second level, which is more talking about what you were saying, which is our family fights a lot, or our family doesn't get along very well, or we don't communicate, or we don't do feelings. How's that for a red flag? Feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. So what someone's narrative is about, tell me where you come from, can give you some really good clues. And when you're thinking about this in the genogram I'm going to have you draw in a few minutes, I'd like for you to just think about that. You don't have to tell me, but I'd like you to think about it. I'm going to ask you to write it down on your paper. And then, in following up on the narrative, what are the rules in your family? Now, most important rules generally within families are unspoken. How many of you have gotten into an elevator, walked up to the person that was already there, and stood nose to nose with them? No one. Okay, did anybody ever tell you don't do that? How old were you? Yeah. You remember that. That's fantastic. Most of the family rules are unspoken. The strongest ones: don't tell. Don't upset your father. Don't hurt your mother's feelings. Keep that to yourself. That's not worth talking about. Stop being unpleasant. You're being so negative. And family conflicts. What do people tend to fight about? What do families fight about? Money. What else? What? Power. Very closely related. What else? Discipline. Their own or someone else's? Children, yeah. Consequences. Time. Politics. Gutsy. Communication. Has anybody ever heard of people having family conflict around who's going to be right? We're involved up in our county in a pilot program where we're focusing on early intervention using team mediation model with a child specialist and a lawyer mediator with families who have at least one child under the age of 6. So we can qualify for first 5 funding. And we are 13 months into this, and it's volunteers, each team, and it's confidential. And so far, well, next week it will be 13 months. So far, none of those people have refiled. And 2 of them have reconciled. I do not know why they reconciled. They were mine and my teammates. I don't know what happened. Does that mean I have to see them again? Not sure. But anyway, so it's pretty amazing. And I think a lot of that had to do with they haven't gotten ingrained, entrenched. They haven't gotten really good at behaving badly. That end of the spectrum. They haven't gotten really honed skills at behaving badly. And then so you're looking at the family rules and the family conflicts among people and among those subgroups. So that's the stuff that we look at on family system genogram. And that can give you a pretty good guess about the kind of trouble that you're going to be running into. This is the transmission typology in terms of, okay, so why is it that some children or why is it that some families become really entrenched in alienation and some of them don't? Why do some kids buy it and some kids don't? There was comment earlier about the age, the risk factor in terms of being between the ages of 9 and 15. I think that that's accurate. And then you start looking at what are the factors in terms of just temperament. So what would you guess? Children who are dependent and fearful, does that make them more vulnerable or invulnerable? Good. And if they have lack of insight or they're confused, are they more vulnerable or less vulnerable? What about if they have interests in themselves rather than taking care of a parent? More or less vulnerable? Yes. That's one of the beauties of adolescence. And actually, one of my favorite things to say to adolescents when I'm working with them is, I don't understand why you're not more preoccupied with yourself. And they'll look at me like, finally, somebody understands me. And I say, you're supposed to be completely preoccupied with yourself right now. That's your developmental job. And you can see their mind just getting happy. You're not supposed to really care too much about your parents. They are your concierges. You try to be polite with them in front of other people. You know, don't make things too difficult for them. Try not to get arrested. That didn't happen to me. But I'll tell you, you're supposed to be completely enamored with your own opinion and the sound of your own voice. So you can see the little mind, you know, is going, yeah, I'm liking this. I'm really liking this. And then start giving them some language about, well, so let's say your parents start dragging you into their little muddy tar pit. What can you say? I don't even ask if they do it or they don't. I know they're doing it because kids will tell me. And I'll say, okay, your parents say they never fight in front of you. They say that they had a very amicable divorce and somehow you're here. So, spill, what's going on? And they'll tell me everything. 2 seconds, because I do a lot of family mediation. That means that I involve the children. And so the children will come in, okay, here's the deal. And then I go in and tell parents, you know what, if you have any drugs, porn, guns, God knows what else in your house, even if it's in a locked safe, please get rid of it. Because kids always know, and you do not want to have an embarrassing conversation somewhere down the road, especially with somebody with a badge, or if you happen to be a targeted parent and somebody wants to get fired up about it. So this transmission typology has a lot to do with the characteristics of the children involved. Now, this intergenerational trauma treatment model is being used. It focuses on complex trauma. Can you see that? Who wants to read aloud what's on that shirt? We will get a long shirt. Isn't that perfect? I was so happy when I found this. I mean, it just made my day. I thought I'm going to have to come back to this Pinterest thing. Yeah, pretty good. But this is a particular type of treatment model that's being used. I'm going to give you some other books to look at later. But it focuses on the complex trauma, which some people don't even believe really exists, because trauma is supposed to be confined to one event, and you only get one event, and then you're supposed to hurry up and get over it. We're going to do some EMDR. We're going to do some deep brain stimulation. We need you to get on with it. But if you are, it's like, have you ever been caught in the surf where you've been trying to get out of the water, and you're trying to get out of the water, and you go down, and then you're trying, and you just can't get your legs underneath you. There's no time to recover. You can't even get up to a baseline of being able to take a full breath. And that is what complex trauma is like. So exactly how is EMDR or deep brain stimulation or let's, pat a pony or something, how is that going to help if you're living in it all day, every day? So what this model does is it focuses on the whole family, but it starts with the caregivers and the adults, recognizing that even though they aren't the short people, that their vulnerability has everything to do with whether or not treatment with the children and the family in general is going to be effective. Because if you want to be helpful to children, you really need to help the parents. And if they can't function, or they're just one bleeding set of wounds, they're not going to be any good to being able to fill their role as a parent. Okay, and then what they do is they also use this model with children between the ages of 3 and 18. So it's very interesting. I'm going to actually put up let me see, I'll give you the address. I'll send it to you, Cindy. So I'm going to put a folder up on the web with a bunch of different things that you can go and look at if you're interested. Okay, so this is the part where I told you about earlier. This is the draw a genogram of your family. So would you please get out your pencils? This is not a quiz. You don't have to turn it in. And the key over there, as you can see, is that jagged line is conflict, because what you're doing is you're looking at the quality of the relationships between people. And I'm going to show you one that's completed in the next slide. Circles are females. Squares are males. I didn't make this up. It came this way. And X across somebody means they're dead. So this is mom, married dad, and they had 2 girls and a boy. And mom came from 2 parents that have an intact marriage. Dad came from 2 that had an intact marriage, presumably. We don't know. So why don't we take a couple minutes and you guys sit down and write out yours. And as you're doing that, I want you to start considering the quality of the relationships between people. I'm going to show you some of that in the next slide too. What the family narrative is. Some of those words that you guys were using earlier. Workaholic, Cuba. Kind of reminded me of Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other. Family rules and family conflicts, what do they tend to be about? Money, power, being right. How many people grew up in families where some people did not apologize? There was a rule. Did anybody ever say out loud, excuse me, but so-and-so doesn't have to apologize in this family? That's one of those silent rules. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So as you can see in this slide, there is some sort of conflict that goes on between mom's parents. And it looks like mom does not like dad. I mean, mom's parents do not like dad very much. And there's some sort of conflict that goes on between second sister and brother. Usually the sequence is the oldest one is on the left. And there's a peaceful relationship between sister number 1 and sister number 2. Also, paternal grandfather is dead, and paternal grandparents had a peaceful marriage. Now remember, this is all from your perception. You don't have to run around and get witnesses. This is about your perception. And then what you do is you start writing down 3 different words in each category about what was the quality of the relationships between people. We know from the drawing that the relationship between mom and dad was conflictual. We know the relationship between maternal grandparents and dad was conflictual, then we might start wondering if maybe there's some sort of jihad brewing, trouble in paradise. And the fact that paternal grandparents, the perception is that they had a peaceful relationship, and also that paternal grandfather is deceased, then you start asking questions about that. I wonder how that affects everything else. Because what is one of the biggest things that has anything to do with parental alienation? Loss. I remember the American Medical Association in their Journal of the American Medical Association, I think it was in 1972, published an article that said that with elderly, 85% of the reason that they went to physicians' offices was because of unresolved grief. And so you just are going to look for 3 different terms in each of those categories about the quality of the relationships, what the family narrative is, the family rules, and the family conflicts. And as you're doing that, then you're going to start asking yourself, gee, is that any of the stuff that I hear myself talking about? Have any of those themes come up in my relationships with other people? How about with my partner? I was really excited about that needle. So, what I heard discussed earlier was how important it was to be really mindful about our own behavior, our feelings, our thoughts, and then focusing on trying to keep ourselves on the appropriate end of the spectrum in terms of the behavior. And how many people believe in the power of self-talk? Raise your hand. Right. The illustration I usually use is, let's say I go home today and my answering machine light is not blinking. One event. I can say to myself, great, I don't have to return any calls. And that's going to give me one set of feelings. Same event, oh great, I have no friends. That's going to take me into a very different set of feelings, right? So reframing how we talk to ourselves about our experience and where we are at and what's going on with us right now is incredibly important. So whether you pray, whether you jog, whether you light a candle, whether you meditate, whether you do yoga, whether you have a little sales meeting with yourself, attitude adjustment, the same thing that I used to ask my kids to do. This isn't a timeout, but why don't you just take some space, go in your room and kind of work on your attitude, and when you're ready, you can come back out. That kind of thing. And they've done a ton of research on this, and they found that, okay, if I start smiling, even if I'm in a crummy mood in the morning and I start smiling, even though I don't want to, and it's not a very sincere smile, and I'm resenting it, and it shows in my smile, 20 minutes later, I'm going to start to feel better. This is not news. So the way we talk to ourselves has everything to do with how everything spreads, how I feel, what I'm thinking. How many people think that feelings come before thoughts? It's a trick question. Don't fall for it. Good, because the thoughts precede the feelings. And that's a commonly believed fallacy. So when you hear somebody say, I can't help it, it's the way I feel, my comeback to that is usually, oh really? Huh. Okay, so when you think your teacher is a real idiot, you just tell her? No. Okay, or when you think your boss has lost his mind, do you just walk up to him and say, I need to tell you how I feel? No. You make appropriate choices in terms of the behavior. And that model, and just in terms of making those distinctions between the feelings and the thoughts and the behavior spectrum, can make it a lot easier. Kids get this very easily. Grown-ups have a much harder time. So, before you speak, think, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And that includes the way we talk to ourselves. Can you guys see what's in the picture on the left? It's a little baby alligator. Isn't it interesting how little baby alligators look really cute, but big ones don't? Why is that? Here's that problem again with the fonts. I can barely stand it, but I'm okay. I'm all right. I'm hanging in there. And Karen, these elephants are for you. I thought they were beautiful. Yes, exactly. When I saw that picture, I thought, oh, Karen's going to love this. And if I'm sitting there saying to myself, well, why me and why now and why is this happening and et cetera, and why do I have to defend myself? When my 9-year-old came in and said, well, I thought Mom said that you always went to prostitutes. What are those? You spent all our money on prostitutes. What's that? You're supposed to take a deep breath. Have some thoughts. Experience some feelings. Maybe a few more deep breaths. And avoid falling into the abyss of self-pity or defending ourselves. If I call you a refrigerator, does it make it true? If I say that you molest goats, does it make it true? I don't want to know if it is true. Although that's not reportable. At least in this country. I don't know if it is in Australia, though. Instead of asking why me and why now, which sounds like the self-pity highway, just think to yourself, why wait? I can turn this around right now. I can put that smile on my face and reflect on my list of gratitudes. Does anybody do a list of gratitudes? Yeah, powerful. How many do you have on your list generally? That's really good. Okay, well, you're advanced. Other people, how many things do you have on your list? 10. That's good, too. Usually when people are traumatized, they don't really have too many things on a list. So sometimes when I'm saying, okay, so tell me something that you're grateful for. And they'll say, I'm alive. You know, that's where a lot of people start. And sometimes I'll let them go on for a while, depending on how fragile they are. And if they're kind of a smarty pants, then I'll say, okay, well, that's enough. That was kind of pathetic. And I'll say, let me give you some help. I'm really glad that I was born a white female in the United States of America in the 20th century. I'm really grateful I don't have a brain tumor. I'm really grateful that I have 2 arms and 2 legs that work most of the time. I'm really glad that I have a lovely family. I'm truly blessed. I'm really grateful for that. Well, right about now, my heart is starting to feel a little lighter. I'm feeling a little less sorry for myself about why me, about anything. And that gives me a tremendous amount of power in myself. If my child is being distant with me, and sometimes my children are distant with me, they're not going to want to be around me more because I'm preoccupied with why me and why now. But they will be drawn to that energy, that light that comes from taking good care of ourselves, even if it started out with kind of a goofy smile that I didn't want to put on at all. So these are 3 different tools that I'm suggesting for you. There certainly are a lot more. We've talked a lot about various people who've written books. This one, Children Held Hostage, this is an excellent book that was published by the ABA 20 years ago. It was published in Boston, so I guess that's why it took it so long to get to California. This was one of the books that we used in putting together a conference last May, which was an interdisciplinary conference in San Jose with lawyers, judges, and mental health folks because we're talking about, okay, so what do we do with the voice of the child? So this was Voice of the Child 1, and that's the main book that I've always used in alienation cases. It's quite excellent. It's kind of expensive. It's about $30, and you can't find their publishings anywhere. I looked, so it's worth it to me. Anyway, this new book on the left is just off the press by Amy Baker, and it's quite good. Karen wrote a lovely chapter in there. Michael, you wrote a nice chapter in there too. I actually read it. Is that you, Jack? Jack? No. Okay. So a number of people wrote some really good materials in there about different research that's been done and different topics. It's excellent, very well researched, very heavily footnoted. I would encourage you to go look at it. And then also these bear cards. This is my new crack. Because bear cards, I was over in Australia not too long ago, and for a training, and we were using bear cards, and I loved bear cards. I wanted to take the bear cards home. They didn't let me, though. They said I had to come home and order my own from Amazon. But they're lovely, and I would encourage you to go and look at them because they have a very sweet way of expressing all of these different feelings, and children are remarkable. Adults are remarkable too in terms of being able to recognize, oh, that's how I feel. That's what my face looks like. That's how I look at myself in the mirror, especially if I'm an adolescent, because remember, I'm supposed to be preoccupied with myself. Very, very useful. And so this is, once again, I won't focus on it, but embrace life. Be courageous. Practice the positive affirmations, that little sales meeting with ourselves in the morning. Sometimes we have to have another one at lunchtime, maybe another one before dinner, another one before we go to sleep. Seek out optimistic and kind people. I have a personal thing about people, especially in reunification cases, because I do a lot of them, and they're really tough, and a lot of them are multi-generational, especially somebody who the main ringleader, the general of the entire team, is dead. That's interesting, because then you got to get collaterals in there and actually bring them into the room. Like the person that knows the whole family, was best friends with both the husband and the wife when they got married, has known the children their entire lives to straighten out what actually happened. But you still have the ringleader, you still have the general might be gone, but the lieutenants are hard at work. And those are very difficult. But when people say, when I'm getting somebody ready for that stuff, I say, okay, you're going to need to change some of your vocabulary. I don't want to hear you talk about your ex. What does that mean? I'm going to talk about my K? If your child hears that, it sounds so disrespectful. So they say, well, what am I supposed to say? And I say, that's my child's mother. That's my child's father. That's my child's sister. That's my stepbrother's third wife. And there's so many different ways, as some of the speakers were saying earlier, that we convey a disdain. And I really like the way that Jen McIntosh put it when she said, it's not the conflict, it's the acrimony. It's the nonverbal stuff. And so when you go, if you go on Amazon and look at the bear cards, when they have all of these amazing ways of showing all of these different feelings, the body language is incredible. And remember that it's a marathon rather than a sprint. So thank you for your kind attention. Now that's a visual, in case you're having a tough moment and your smile doesn't work. I really love Pinterest. I'd just like to mention that. Okay? Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We have another speaker. This time we have a speaker from Toronto, Canada. His name is Brian Ludmer. He is an attorney. Brian's practice focuses on cases involving denial of access and parental alienation. Brian is also a distinguished business and securities law attorney with over 27 years of experience. Brian, like many of us here, has personally felt the effects of parental alienation. Brian was alienated from his 2 children in early 2005 at the time of his separation. However, Brian was able to successfully repair and enhance those relationships over the following couple of years. Brian's daughter and son now are both in university, and for many years now have had a loving and well-bonded relationship with him, as they did prior to the separation. Brian is dedicated to graciously sharing what he has learned from all of his clients and cases, as well as from his own personal experience with professionals and targeted parents across North America. Brian is a frequent speaker in multimedia sources and has spoken for ISNAF at the November 2011 conference and for PAAO, the Children's Right Council, the Canadian Equal Parenting Coalition, and other organizations across Canada and the United States. Brian has also been speaking to the Ontario Canada Hospital Network on PA diagnosis and therapy. Brian works as special counsel with U.S. attorneys and mental health professionals to assist U.S.-based targeted parents. Ladies and gentlemen, let's please welcome Brian Ludwig.
Okay. Valerie is always fantastic. I remember her last year, so there is a tougher slot than following lunch, and that's following Valerie. All right, there we go. So, like several of your speakers, like Bill, it is amazing the one thing we all have in common, no matter what discipline we come from. So what is a corporate and M&A lawyer doing speaking to a group such as this? Well, obviously it is the thing we have in common. And I have several slides in this deck that we'll have to go through rather quickly if I'm to have any hope of covering the breadth of the topic. And I have several excerpts from a couple of treasured movies that tell you all you want to know. And this one is great because this is not a fun topic. And to those who have not been exposed to this terrible social ill, this embarrassment in a civilized society that we call parental alienation, it is quite a disturbing topic, and it may take us another generation to solve it, but it is inevitable with the knowledge that's being generated that we will solve it. So, as Morpheus said, follow me. There's no way I'll be able to cover this, but this is a sense of the breadth of the topic. If you really want to master how to survive one of these dynamics, you have to understand the psychological processes and the role of all the different people who will touch the family system along the way. And that includes therapists and custody and access assessors and the court system, which is remarkably broken in this area, particularly when you have regular exposure to other types of law, as I do. This area of law, which is not well thought of by practitioners in other areas of law, is fundamentally broken and needs a complete rethink. But for those who have to endure the current system, I will offer you as many tips as I can. Now, the role of counsel. Amongst those you'll be exposed to are the dreaded lawyers. That includes your own lawyer. Quite an interesting relationship between counsel and even their own client in this area of law. Clients can be very emotional, very demanding, and don't have a type of objective distance that is of assistance to counsel practicing in other areas of law. But if we're going to serve people such as yourselves, this is the multifaceted skill set that we must bring to play. And that requires an extraordinary amount of reading, attending conferences, and expanding the breadth of knowledge of practitioners. You can't just be a family law attorney and practice in this specialized subset in the same way that a GP should not be doing plastic surgery. And GPs quite often get into significant trouble delving into lucrative areas of practice that they shouldn't be touching. It's a bounds of competency issue. The services have to be delivered in a different fashion. There's a certain amount of empathy that your clients require, a certain dignity that the system has stripped them of, that it is your job to try and give back to them. And yet, as we'll see in a slide, you must be able to deliver these empathetic, insightful, multifaceted services without getting completely drawn in to your client's pain, fear, and frustration, because then you're really not much good to them, and you'll chew yourself up in the process. But it is quite the battle, as the last point says. So it was with some just amazing relief that I stumbled in my daily Google scrape of the words parental alienation, the website run by Claire Brett Moran. It's called the Lonely Parent Blog. And you should, for those, my slides are going to be very dense, so you don't have to be scribbling furiously. I'm happy to email this at the end to everybody, and ISNAF may make it available as well. So I stumble on this thing, and I'm going through some of Claire's postings, and I'm reading through this, and then I come to this one, which is just says it all. Because as much as you try and deliver empathetic and insightful services, in an effort to make your client feel better, that they're going to be protected, that you will deliver their children to them. What a responsibility for an outside practitioner, outside the family system, to take on that burden, an immense responsibility. I thought this was particularly insightful, and I'm going through some of her other postings, and I just said, I've got to meet this person. This is fantastic. So she has a contact form, and I fill it out. I said, Dear Claire, stumbled on your blog. It's immensely insightful. I'd love to correspond with you and have a chat. 2 days later, I get an email from one of my clients saying, Brian, Claire is me, under a pseudonym because I don't want the children to know. That's all from you. So it proves once and again that we love to hear what we say, and we find it very insightful when others feed it back to us. There you go. Okay. What of the lawyer on the other side of the file? We've all met them. We've all endured them. They're the ones who write the letters that your client is a nasty, brutish pig, and the children are justified in not wanting to go. My client's not in contempt of court, etc., etc. What of these people? Unfortunately, our system, this dysfunctional family law system, applies the same model that it does for commercial litigation to family litigation. And so the historical adage of the lawyer as the advocate, the lawyer going out there as the warrior on the field of battle for their client, somehow applies in family law, despite all the pronouncements that, whether it's in professional standards or advisory bodies, that please try and, put the needs of the children first. The fundamental duty of the lawyer for an alienating parent is to represent that client. And something's wrong with that. That's one of the things in this particular area that we have to struggle to find a better way. Are there any limitations on blind advocacy? Yes. Are they effectively deployed? Does it really make a difference in practice? No. Now, here's a potential solution, because if, as has been held time and time again in many cases, manipulating children against the other parent is child abuse, it's undeniable that it's child abuse, then how come we don't see the child protective authorities intervening more frequently in cases when a child has had to split from one parent as a result of not being free to have two equal, healthy, happy homes? And the answer is quite simply, doesn't matter the country, doesn't matter the jurisdiction, we have this problem in Canada as well. They're very, very good if there's bruises on the body and if it's an unclean home and there's no food. They are very, very bad when it comes to risk of emotional harm. Children's aid societies tend to get involved when you really don't want them or need them, and they tend not to get involved when you desperately need them. And that's pervasive as well. The real reason why we don't have more interventions in these cases from your local child protective authority, in Canada we call them children's aid societies, they don't have the budget. Given the pervasiveness of this issue we're here to talk about today, they do not have the budgets. These are intense cases. They chew up an immense amount of resources. And if they started to get involved in these cases to protect the child's right to a healthy relationship with both parents, they just couldn't do it. So it's, again, a systemic problem. So when I speak to the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies in a couple of months, which is the educational and organizational grouping of all of them throughout the whole province, this, along with false allegations, which also chew up a lot of resources, are going to be some of the topics that we discuss. Now, in the litigation world and the corporate and securities world, there are boundaries on how lawyers approach this. And this book garnered a lot of attention in Canada. John Coffey, who is a corporate governance and securities professor, I believe at Yale, wrote this well-known book. So in the securities law field, it has long been discussed that the lawyers involved in the deals and the lawyers involved in ensuring proper public disclosure on a timely basis have an overriding duty to the capital markets that even supersedes their duty to their own clients. That's now formalized in securities laws in the United States and Canada and in accompanying professional bodies for up-the-ladder reporting. So if the chief financial officer is telling you we don't have to disclose that liability and you don't agree, it doesn't matter. You're obligated to go over his or her head to the board of directors. But we don't have this kind of gatekeeping rule in family law. What of counsel for the child? Who came up with this one? Let's triangulate a child into the parent's high conflict divorce, give them their own lawyer, and give them a seat at the table. Then let's have them use the lawyer to say, I want to play rep hockey 5 times a week, and mom thinks that's too much. So I'm going to have my lawyer side with dad's lawyer and get me on the rep hockey team, and I'm going to get my own way. And I couldn't possibly be making that up, right? That's actually from one of my cases. So there are many, many aspects of the system that don't make a lot of sense. Why do we have a lawyer for children? It's just one of several alternative pipelines to get a child's views and preferences before the court in a non-determinative fashion. Fine. Other venues are family therapist, custody and access assessment, a judicial interview, or God forbid, the child testifying. Is this the proper way to get the child's views and preferences before the court? And are the powers and role given to a children's lawyer the appropriate ones if that's the sole goal? That's for debate in other forums. But it's part of the mix, this crazy dynamic that shows up on these high conflict cases. And some of the things that Children's Counsel struggle with is they're going to come and they're going to put the child's views and preferences before the court in the midst of a very complex state of affairs, and they're quite often given a very limited budget. So how accurate is their assessment of the independence of the children's views going to be? Strategy. Now, of the topics that I hope to cover until they start bringing out the hook, because I'm going too long, the one that I really want to get to, the secret sauce of today's presentation, because some of you were here last year, where I spoke just on what targeted parents can do to help their professionals help them. But the secret sauce is going to be how we structure reconciliation therapy, and that's coming up. So I may go quickly through this section. All right. Lots of planning. Fail to plan is plan to fail. This is a key one. All warfare is based on deception. If you're holding the trump card, don't tell them you're holding the trump card. So, at the earliest stages of a case, when the other side is clearly breaching court orders, you're in an informational gathering and offering alternatives. Gosh, certainly there's a better way to handle this, and okay, you overheld the child yesterday, can I at least take the child for breakfast and a movie today, etc., because each interaction with a parent who overholds is another opportunity for that parent to either do the right thing or commit yet another contempt of court on the same weekend. And we want to give them as much rope as possible to hang themselves, while at the same time being seen to be the more balanced, even though we're being victimized. Think Valerie's presentation. We want to be seen to be the reasonable one, even though we're under attack. What we do want to avoid, and where we do want to move aggressively, is delay. Delay is the #1 risk. So for you fans of neuroscience, think the new pathways with an internal working model of targeted parent is incompetent or a danger, being hardwired and strengthened, ruts in the road of the brain's thinking, if you will, and the historical good memories being pruned. We used to think that the kids were just literally putting on the dog. Now we know that literally some of those older, more favorable memories are dimming, like an old light bulb, just dimming. The longer it goes on, the more exhausted the targeted parent is, and the more likely they are to make a mistake. Passivity is a mistake, but it has to be channeled. The energy has to be channeled. So, I came up with the phrase, PAS is a disease meant to be suffered in silence. They cut you off from your friends, they cut you off from your supports, they cut you off from your child, they change the contact information everywhere. You're meant to be shuffled off to a corner, to dry up like an old leaf and blow away in the wind. That's their strategy. To counter it, you are as visible as possible. You show up at every single event without exception, even if you're not wanted, even if the child will avoid looking at you as they run up and down the soccer field. Doesn't matter. They know you're there. That's money you're investing in the bank of reconciliation. If you don't show up, the aligned parent will say to the child, I guess they don't care. So you must show up, always. You never give up. If you're reduced to supervised access, that indignity because of some false allegation, and it just becomes too much for you to bear, you go anyway, as Valerie said, with a smile on your face. Certain things like the name change, not calling you mom, not calling you dad, or changing the last name, there's just no answer but to tackle it extremely aggressively and immediately. It's shocking that some people would say otherwise, but a name is not a vanity plate. A name is not, I choose to wear my blue T-shirt today. A name defines who the child is. And therefore, at the earliest sign of any name changes, you must respond very aggressively and very quickly. Some of the other tips are to keep responding to proposals, keep a dialogue going at all times, keep offering compromise-type solutions, little bits and pieces, any traction possible to get you in front of the child, even though it's a far cry from the court order. We never, ever turn down any time. It's all without prejudice. Say, without prejudice, you know I think the court order is enforceable, but you're offering me an hour this week, I'll take it. Now, the family law system is not going to help you because they don't want to give you your trial. Trials are expensive, not just for you, but for the family court system. Walk into a trial in progress. There's a courtroom in a building with a judge, with a court services officer, and a stenographer, and a clerk. Trials are expensive for the system. And the system will therefore try and divert you. Try this, try that, try this, come back. And of course, then you run into delay. So all of the diversions, including the worst one, go off and try some therapy. Judges, lawyers, think the word therapy is a panacea and think the word therapy is a completely self-applying term. Therapy is therapy. And of course, the mental health practitioners know there's many schools of therapy, and I'm going to give you a vision of the only type of structured therapy that holds any chance of success. And here we're getting to them. So, in non-technical terms, because the mental health practitioners here will be looking at this and saying, why is he using that term? So in layman's terms, what the uneducated part of the world considers therapy doesn't work, can actually prove harmful, and structured therapy that will work in these cases looks like this. So, open versus closed. Every jurisdiction has privacy laws that protect the patient-therapist relationship. And in these cases, we get the therapist saying, oh, I can't tell you what the child said. That's, you know, otherwise the child won't open up to me. Well, then how are we going to tackle this? So the only answer is the process itself by court order gets structured as fully open, multi-client, one therapist, not fragmented therapy where therapist is working with this party and a therapist with the other party and a therapist for the child. That's a recipe for failure as well. I'll come to that slide in a sec. But it's multi-client, fully open, a timeline after which you return to court, case management along the way, all structured to avoid the middle point, the Therapeutic Alliance. People familiar with the term the Therapeutic Alliance? That is the bond formed between therapist and patient, which says, I'm in your court. I'm here to make you feel good. You can let your defenses down and start to talk to me about what's really going on. But in doing so, the therapist often will get co-opted into the worldview or internal working model of their patient, whose side they have to take, or else the patient will stop coming. And I'm not talking about they care financially that the patient will stop coming. They want to keep working with the patient, and they become invested in the relationship themselves. It's a two-way street, the Therapeutic Alliance, and that will stop the effectiveness of the type of therapy we're talking about, where there's one therapist and the entire family system is the patient, and it's goal-oriented, not individual patient, I'll make you feel good and help you with your problems. That's not what the reconciliation therapist does. You're starting to have the tools. Aligned parents game the system. The children know that if they show any openness, what's going to come from that is more time with the targeted parents. So they come in there spending all their time just chewing up the time, justifying why they got alienated in the first place. It's completely non-productive. And the aligned parent has to be part of the therapeutic solution as well. They also spend their share of the reconciliation therapy time, chewing up time, justifying why they and the child were right. Again, completely non-productive. You need to choose your therapist very carefully. They have to, one, understand this dynamic. They got to be not afraid to bang some heads together. They need to challenge the distortions. And in any event, some early therapeutic input of whatever type can be helpful, because one of the options available to a court that's just looking to not give you your trial is go off and do some therapy. Well, if you can tell the judge, well, we've been there, done that, tried that with, I had one case in a I can't say the town, but southwestern Ontario, 10 separate therapists representing every possible discipline of the mental health world had been involved, had tried, and failed. Okay? And how does that happen? It only happens because of a system that keeps, oh, you don't want a trial. You don't want a trial. Try this therapist, try another therapist. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it doesn't have a chance of working. Because mental health therapy requires a willing patient. So if the aligned parent and the children are not invested in the process and approaching it with an open mind, it's destined to fail. Therapist fragmentation. Now here's something where we securities lawyers have made a remarkable contribution to the therapeutic world. Fragmentation as a term was first used broadly when we started to get all these off-market stock exchanges, trades just between major institutional investors themselves, automated trading markets, and the regulators got worried about fragmentation. We can't regulate the market now because there's all these other trading platforms going on. Well, the same thing applies here. No one really has a sense of what's going on and whether the left hand knows what the right hand's doing, or whether the therapists are working at cross purposes, or whether there's gaps in the therapy if it's fragmented. These situations, no matter how complex the family history, require one therapist whose job is to fix the entire family system. Now, somebody earlier today had prompted the fact that I'm here today from Toronto through Windsor to Detroit and LA. I was in Windsor yesterday finishing off the last day of 4 weeks of trial evidence on a case that's already been to trial. Started in 2008. This is what's wrong with the system. I got a massive judgment for the targeted parent 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. And it should have, frankly, it never should have started because there were minutes of settlement signed in October of 2010, which were undermined. Fully robust parenting plan with all the parenting rules. So I went to a 5-week trial. We got our decision June 2011. The aligned parent found in contempt of court, and more rules and more interventions given and directions that this family system, 3 little girls, is going to settle down and be healthy. Didn't happen. We've now completed 4 weeks of evidence. We're back for 2 days of argument in early April, and then we'll get a follow-on decision. And I won't say anything more because it's before the courts, but it's a sign how many people can do this, how many court systems can afford to throw that much resources at one family. There's something wrong. So here's what it looks like. Here's the secret sauce, all on one slide. Multi-party, fully open, goal-oriented, healthy family relationships, not make you feel good or prove you're right. Time limited, must be pulled off. We're not here to just spend the rest of the children's childhood in therapy. 6 months. Now, where did I get 6 months? There's a very bright person in the back of the room, Dr. Craig Childress, who said, that if you can't pull off intervention properly in 6 months, you pretty well know it's not going to work. Milestones. If you're not getting regular assessments about whether you're on plan, you don't want to wait until 5.5 months to realize it's not working. So you're going to set a series of milestones in terms of the children's behavior, but not in terms of access, which is point 8. The milestones are the children will share homework, the children will be seeing their grandparents, the soft stuff. Because if you don't see yourself getting traction in this stuff along the way, you know it's not going to work. And since, point 6, active case management by a case management judge who says, you don't have to keep going back into the system, you get a different judge every time who doesn't know the background, all case manage it through to a certain point. You can't demand that. A judge has to agree, and usually the regional senior judge has to agree as well. For high conflict cases, they now realize generally they have to assign a case management judge. That's the person who you go back to monthly for a quick update. Okay, what are any stumbling blocks? Need any procedural orders? Anybody need their tree shaken a little bit because they're not behaving? 7, the everyone on the same page premises, not premises like a physical building, but the premise of the therapy. So, we don't want the aligned parent and the children chewing up our therapy, proving they were right. We need all members of the family system being told and accepting in open court when this is structured the following. We are only going to do this because everybody, including the parent who's been throwing the mud, accepts that the targeted parent is normative, i.e., no worse than the average single mom or single dad out there who does have their kids. Not perfect, not holding a ticker tape parade for them, just average. Now, what happens when you get the aligned parent right there in open court as this consent order is being drafted by the judge, saying, yes, I agree, mom is normative? Well, that means your therapy stands a very good chance of success, since the therapist will say to that parent, oh, stop, I'm not hearing that. You agreed that mom is normative. So what that means is, and here's where the language is so important, there are issues in the family system. There are issues in the relationships. But if you define the problems as issues instead of inherent flaws in the targeted parent, you know you're going to solve them, because all issues are solvable amongst people proceeding in good faith with the requisite mental health assistance. So as soon as you define the problems as issues and not inherent flaws because mom is normative, you're halfway there. That gets done in open court before the therapy starts. That empowers the therapist to focus the therapy on solutions. The last part. Also necessary to empower the therapist, do not make the therapist the arbiter of how fast we ramp up access for the targeted parent. That corrupts their role. The parties must agree. They're agreeing on the milestones. 6 months out, we're right back to full compliance with the previous court order. The parties must agree on the ramp up in access. Then no one's spending their time lobbying the therapist that it's going too slow or it's going too fast. We all know where we have to be in 6 months. So let's just agree on a ramp up. Take the, as Valerie said again, take the longer term view. And the therapist can therefore focus on the issues and the hurt feelings, etc. There you are. That's the only hope you have of an intervention that will actually work. And you need all those elements. because the actual experience, as many of you know intuitively, in this area is that we have way more failures than successes. Way more. And that's wrong. We have the mental firepower to do better. We should be doing better. It's unacceptable that we continue to have these failures. Okay. Judicial case management, as I mentioned, is one of the elements. I have a very small case, intractable, and the judge that we were before, when I brought my motion for contempt, didn't even ask to hear from me. I'm unpacking everything, and the judge says, Mr. Ludmer, it looks like you're getting ready to make submissions. And so, yeah, I guess that's why I'm here. So I don't need to hear from you, Mr. Ludmer. And then just slammed the other parent, said $500 a missed visit. There has not been, in an intractable case, a missed visit ever since. Money talks. Why don't courts do that more often? Money talks, it is a motivator, and it does not make a victim out of the aligned parent the way jailing them for contempt of court or reversal of custody, all these things that the system seems too timid to actually use. The mere threat of their existence should solve this, but everybody knows that they don't do it, so it doesn't have any credibility. But if we regularly said $500 a missed visit, do what you're going to do, you'd have a lot fewer cases. That and cost awards if it does go to trial. Now, as you can see from this deck, I'm a big fan of late night movies when I take my needed break every once in a while. So perseverance, very, very important. Again, Valerie had a slide about it's a marathon. When I spoke last year, I had a series of slides that I'm going to fly through that tells targeted parents how to build your evidentiary records so that your mental health advisors and your legal advisors can do our job. And so we're looking for you to self-educate a bit, which is why we're glad you're here, so you know what to look for. Quite often, as I have clients going through their history, they're spending a lot of time on certain events and certain things, and well, yeah, I know why that's meaningful to you, but it's not really meaningful to the other decision makers in this process. And then there'll be other events or happenings, they just fly by, and I'm pulling the emergency cord, I'm saying, stop, stop. That's important, okay? So the experienced observers of this nightmare you're going through, we know what those pearls are. If you can self-educate about what the key diagnostic criteria are, because there are recognized diagnostic criteria, even though it's not in DSM, you help us help you. And it all comes back to attachment theory. What are they doing directly or indirectly to make you look unsafe, uncaring, or unavailable? Just skip through a couple of things. Here's some of the things you're going to do: a detailed timeline document. We're going to engage with third parties. You're all consumed. Third-party observers have very important insights. You're going to maintain a full daily diary as it happens. No detail too irrelevant, because you guys can't really judge what's important and what's not. I want to know what temperature it was that day on the soccer field. And here's how you're going to organize it. You're going to have telephone logs. I'm going to bring a motion for live questioning well before trial, because I know the questions, and I'm going to show you the questions that I'm going to ask the other side. And the nice thing about it is this presentation in its various forms as it developed over the last 5-6 years is all over the place. It's all over. I don't care. I want them to know what I'm going to ask them. There's nothing they can do about it. Because if they don't do what I'm asking them about, you wouldn't have the problem with the children in the first place. Okay. Now, not all aligned parents are the same. So, I have a lot of very, timid, nervous, first-time divorced parents. I can deal with that. I can get my client to bend, and we can put in all kinds of rules, as humiliating as they are, that my client will ensure that children go to bed by 8:30. All the things that are bothering you, ma'am, don't worry, I'll make you comfortable. You can allow the children to go, and my client will just, in the long-term interest, suck it up and agree to all kinds of rules you want to impose on his household. I can deal with that person. Histrionic, again, access exchange points, things of that. The narcissistic, borderline, hate-filled type person, there's nothing you can do with them. And I have had some very sad situations where, for cultural or religious reasons, the most perfect targeted parent in the world, a master's in psychology mixed in with teachers college, etc., they're of the wrong religion, and those children will never accept them as a parent. And those are also particularly tragic. Now, for the reason that I said, we never base our strategy on getting through to the aligned parent. They're not going to change. The ongoing case that I have is just as an example of that. They go on for years. When you look at the case law and you see cases, the same family returning to court time and time again. Okay, there's my 10-minute warning, guys. And so we have a couple of slides why. All right, there's Craig's website. He's very, I'm going to have to do the boasting for Dr. Childress. There is a wealth of amazing materials on Craig's website. Now, I was a big Arnie fan, so the former governor of California actually, in this movie, forget about all the mental health literature, the best description ever of an alienating parent is right here. Cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with, doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and absolutely will not stop ever until the relationship is dead, because those children are his or her children and not yours. And can we stop it with today's system? Sometimes you can. All right. But we know from a mental health perspective, we know from a legislative perspective, that the intent is that children come out of this mess with 2 healthy relationships. So we will solve this eventually, but it's only because you guys are here with this list of speakers that have been assembled, really, and the board of ISNAF, to their credit. This is what's going to solve it, this exchange of ideas and stories and support and that soft touch that Karen brings. I'll never forget the feeling in the room last year. It was just absolutely amazing. I usually get these cases after people have cycled through a lawyer or two, and it's not going anywhere. And I find that people get comfortable, like the proverbial frog in the pot of water. If it's cold, the frog won't jump out, and you can increase the heat slowly. And then just targeted parents, they just get used to their world shrinking on them, and another indignity on, and they're withdrawing, and that's why I say PA is a disease meant to be suffered in silence. Don't do that. Custody and access assessments can help, but the main thing, that is a difficult process. The blame game, finger pointing, takes a while, expensive. If you can jump right into the type of structured therapy that I had on that earlier slide, that's the way to go, with lots of parenting rules. Now, look what I did for you Americans. Okay? Now, actually, I must say that the Charles Kuralt narrated PBS series Revolution, for those of you who've seen it, 6 or 7, it is back on. It comes on every 6 to 8 months, and that really is fantastic. All right. There's pages and pages of case law that PA is emotional abuse, not used properly by lawyers. Everybody will pick apart the targeted parent. Oh, you know, a little rigid on the bedtime and things of that. Sorry, those impairments, if they are impairments, don't rise to the level of causing this. And so, though some of you have spoken to me in the past know that I use the but-for test. But for the observable actions of the aligned parent, would the targeted parent, with all their infirmities, be wiped out of the kids' lives? If the answer is no, you found your cause. No parent's perfect. Even the aligned parent's not perfect. And children, it's part of individuation, push the limits, have difficulties with their parents. That's what teenagers do, as Valerie reminds us. Doesn't rise to being wiped out. That's the but-for test. Okay, so some of these I've already covered. Multi-directional court orders so that the third parties, right, schools get this case that I have ongoing in Windsor. 5 teachers from the children's school were summoned to attend. Why? To give evidence about how wonderful the kids are, and they're balanced and they're respectful and they're doing well in school. And that's a huge mistake on the part of the other council, because, oh really? So the only place that they're disrespectful and disorganized, everything, is with the targeted parent. There's my 5-minute mark. So I don't think that's going to work. Okay. Combination, legal, therapeutic, and practical interventions. Those who attended last year know one of the tips that I used was food. It's hard for children to be angry when they always have every single one of their favorite foods. So I would get up at 6:30 in the morning and I would run around to all the different, you know, prepared food places, and every single time they opened the fridge, it was like you had to, like it was going to fall out at, and everything was there. And I never asked for any credit, never said a word, but they knew that, oh, he went there and he went there and he went there and he went there, there, and it was just recognized. So it's just these soft courtesies that accumulate, and the children say, you know, pretty useful guy to have around. So there's I help all my clients with some of the practical answers as well. Okay. Now, look at 16. So we're doing these custody and access assessments, and the aligned parent, everything's going well for them, and the kids love them, and they all present well. The targeted parent is a mess, just a mess. Their whole world is crashed. They're not performing well at work. Confusion, hurt, anger, frustration. Now we're going to assess you as parents and people. And we expect to get it right, okay? So that's why targeted parents need a lot of hand-holding through these custody and access assessments. Okay, this is what I mean. Take every hour you can. And this is what aligned parents are petrified about. Any exposure to the targeted parent and the targeted parent's extended family could be the thin edge of the wedge that the children say, oh, I actually like them. I want more of that. So take every opportunity you can. Go to every single thing. Let them see you. Smile. Soft, always soft-spoken. So that forces the aligned parent into the mistakes. They always go too far with their exclusionary behavior. And here are the reversal of custody cases. And we see this is the secret sauce. If you're going to go to trial and you really think reversal of custody is the only answer, in every single case, it is pitched as short-term trauma to the kids with the reversal of custody versus the long-term benefit, and courts have to focus on the long-term. And why? Because the aligned parent didn't accept responsibility, was given countless opportunities to change, has no capacity to change, has never taken responsibility, and that's the language you see every single time. That's the case you have to build. That's why we keep, here's the slide, alienators never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. We keep asking. This, could I at least have a lunch? Someone's coming in from out of town. We're asking. They're not doing, and we're documenting. Now, I'm probably out of time, so there's a lot here, and as I said, happy to email it to everybody. There are answers, but this is in a state of development. You need experienced people on your team who can guide you, and then it works. So for George, kudos, stood the course. My own little interregnum was much, much, much shorter than that, and I won't belabor this gathering with my own journey. But there are success stories out there. It can be done, and it will be done, and we will solve this if we keep coming together like this. So thanks for your time and attention.